Hello there, this is Histrivia number 3, and for this one we're going to be doing another election series. This one's going to be the election of 1948. Now, like the election of 1912, in a video that I already did, the election of 1948 is also a very interesting one in American history. In the election of 1948, you have four main candidates. First, you have the Republican candidate, Governor Thomas Dewey of New York. Now, a lot of people who don't know their election history think that Thomas Dewey easily got the nomination in 1948 because of his nomination in 1944. Well, that isn't really the case. He went through a tough primary season before he became the nominee. He had to deal with, a senator named Robert Taft, the grandson of the famous President Taft, and he also had to deal with someone named Stanson. And it looked like for a while in the primaries that Stanson was going to be the victor and be the Republican nominee. But in the end, Dewey trounced him and won enough delegates to secure the nomination. Okay, now we go to the Democratic nomination. This one is a little bit more confusing than the Republican nomination. The Democratic Party splits into basically three parties, mainly because of its convention. At the convention, Truman and the Democrats at the convention want a civil rights platform. This is when civil rights started to become more popular. A lot of people think it was in the 60s it became popular, but no, it was in the late 40s it started to seep up into politics. Truman and some Democrats wanted equal rights, a civil rights bill, and the old party Democrats did not want that, mainly the Southern old party Democrats. In fact, at the convention, when a civil rights platform was proposed, several dozen delegates from several southern states, mainly from Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina. Of course, it's South Carolina. But anyway, they left the convention hall and they decided to form their own party, known as the Dixiecrats. Their party was mainly for Southern interests and Southern rights, to protect the Southern way of life. Now, at the other end of the Democratic Party, now that's the far right of the Democratic Party. Then you have the far left of the Democratic Party, which thinks that Truman isn't going that far enough. With this, those are the progressives and their candidate, Henry Wallace. Now, Henry Wallace used to be he was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's VP candidate in 1940. But in 1944, when Roosevelt was going for re-election, he dropped his vice president and went with Truman because Vice President Wallace kind of scared, in one Democratic colleague's terms, he scared the hell out of people. So he returns in 1948 with the newly formed Progressive Party, and wants to get votes from there. Now, as far as how the votes were spread out, a lot of people, especially the Republicans and Dewey, thought that this was going to be a landslide victory for Dewey because of the Democratic Party being split into three fractions. But unlike Dewey, though, Truman pushed ahead. Despite having the fractions in his party, he went out, he campaigned, he went to almost every city in the state, in the country, and he campaigned. He did a lot of doorstep stops, train whistle stops, and tried to push out the vote. So So election day comes, and the votes are tallying up, and the Dewey campaign thinks that it's going to be a Republican year. The country's finally going to go Republican, and before the end of the night, we'll have President-elect Dewey. This, however, is not the case. The votes take longer to count than any. This is the first election in decades in which nobody knows the winner until early morning. So, in the early mornings, of course, H.T. Kaltenborn, the news person at the time, announced that Dewey lost to Truman, and Truman was victorious out of all of the candidates. So, and the one thing that is remembered is this one thing. Before the election was called, the Chicago Tribune, which at that time, oddly enough, was pro-Republican at the time, they jumped a little bit ahead of the gun, and put a headline: "Dewey defeats Truman in a landslide victory." So, in the morning when Truman had won, he was getting on the train to go elsewhere, and either a news reporter or someone gave him the morning paper of the Chicago Tribune, and he's like, "Mr. President, did you see the morning paper?" And he looks at it, and he starts to laugh. And when someone wants his picture taken, of course, of the winner, Truman holds up that infamous Dewey defeats Truman paper. So, what have we learned from this? Basically, a lot of the election of 1948 is very interesting because of its mistake, and also because of the many different fractions involved. This will be the last time in American politics that a third party gets a significant amount of states. Sure, there are third-party candidates after 1948, but they hardly get a state. They rarely get states nowadays. This is the last election that any third-party candidate clenches a few number of states. Like if you look at the Electoral College, Strom Thurmond, the Southern States Rights Democrat, he won 39 out of the 531 Electoral College votes. So anyway, this is not important just because of Truman's great victory, but it's also important because it's the last time in American politics that a third-party candidate has won a state. So anyway, after the election of 1948, Truman secured his victory, but unfortunately, his term in his own right kind of didn't go well as planned. Truman was looked at mainly the way that history portrays him now is not what people at the time portrayed him. When he left office in 1953, when Dwight Eisenhower was elected, his approval ranking was at a very low percentage, the lowest it has ever been for a president in the 20th century up to that point. But because historians have looked over Truman and have looked over his legacy, he has become a lot more popular in recent times. So, what happened with his second term? With his second term, it was kind of like the first. It was kind of different. He pushed a lot of old Roosevelt cabinet members out. He replaced, Secretary of States. He replaced, others, but he also kept people too. One problem that he had, though, was with a well-known military, well, two well-known military generals he had a problem with. One military general, I forget his name. It was, I think it was Patton or someone. In 1948, this was like, well, this was before the election, but it affected his second term as well. He had to vote on whether to recognize the state of Israel, and one of his cabinet members didn't want him to do that, and he kind of resigned after Truman supported Israel. So, that's one thing that changed during his second term. That guy wasn't really there. Another thing that happened during his second term, of course, was Korea. This was the first war in a number of wars to defeat communism in the Cold War, and it really hurt Truman. You have a lot of people, bashing the president, bashing his members of his administration, saying that our boys are dying in Korea, and what is Truman and the Democratic Party doing? And he gets tired of McCarthy. I mean, no, not MacArthur. Douglas MacArthur. He is the leading general in Korea, Douglas MacArthur. You might remember him if you know World War II history from the Pacific War. He and Truman bash heads a lot, and he ends up firing and getting rid of the general. And this is a tragic mistake on his part, because the country basically goes against him. You have Republicans in the Senate bashing him. You have those like Senator MacArthur and other prominent Republicans at the time say, the person that you should get rid of is, members of your own cabinet. Keep our general and get rid of members of your own cabinet. So, really, Truman had a rocky second term. Even though he won a victory in 1948, he had a rocky second term. So anyway, that is it for this video, and till next time.